The rest of our evening really is devoted to our special guest, Debra Fileta. Debra is a licensed professional counselor. She specializes in dating, marriage, and relationship issues, but also in a whole spectrum of mental health disorders and issues. Let me just tell you a little bit some kind of her, what she's authored and things she's been doing. She's the author of True Love Dates, Choosing Marriage, and Love in Every Season. Another book called Are You Really Okay?, which everyone should have picked up tonight. And, of course, Married Sex, which I mentioned earlier. She's also the host of the Love Plus Relationships podcast. That's a podcast. Check out that tonight. You can look at it right now on your phone, Love Plus Relationships podcast. Her popular relationship advice blog is called TrueLoveDates.com. I'm sure she'll probably reference that. TrueLoveDates.com reaches millions of people each year. But more than anything, and this is straight from really, I think, from Debra, from her website, more than anything, she is a woman in love with Jesus. And I think that's what drew Byron and Carla to her, and it comes out in everything she does. She has a love for God that drives her, propels her forward as a wife, as a mother, as a professional counselor, as an author, and a speaker. I think you'll see that tonight. She and John live in Lancaster, Pennsylvania with their 4 kids, Ella, Elijah, Ezra, and Ethan. Let's give a warm Waco welcome to Debra Fileta.
Hello. It's good to be with you. Waco, Texas. John and I are from Pennsylvania, and we did not expect it to be this cold in Texas. Like, what is going on? We would thank God I brought my winter coat. But it's been fun. We've really enjoyed it here so far. And just a little bit about me, as you heard, I'm a licensed professional counselor. So tonight might be a little bit different than your average marriage talk from a pastor. We're going to dig a little bit deeper with some psychology, but of course, rooted in biblical truth. And I think that's really the most important part. As mentioned, we have 4 kids, and it's true. The book Married Sex was the culprit to surprise COVID baby number 4. And just through the process of writing that book, my husband and I conceived our surprise 4th child, and that's why I wasn't able to be here live last year. He's almost 1 already. So when you come up to the book table, remind me to show you a picture of him because he's just the cutest little thing. So it's good to be here with you. Tonight we're talking about choosing marriage, and that is the title of a book that I wrote with the subtitle, Why It Has to Start with We is Greater Than Me. And that's really the equation of a healthy marriage. And so over the course of the weekend, we're going to talk about some choices that you need to make today to create a better marriage for tomorrow. But let me start by telling you about a tale of 3 licenses. So I'll never forget the day I got my driver's license. I was 16 years old. I had about 100 hours of driving training under my belt. I felt like an expert. 100 hours, when you're 16, you think you know what you're doing. I went to our our DMV, and the man that happened to be giving my driver's test that day was a really serious guy with long gray ponytail, a long gray handlebar mustache, Harley Davidson jacket, and he just looked like he hadn't smiled in years. I mean, he was so serious. And I was pretty nervous when he got in the car. He was one of the ones that was just so intimidating. Everybody knew that you didn't want him for your driver's test. So he gets in the car, and I start getting nervous. And when I get nervous, I get chatty. So I start to chit-chat in the car with him. Hey, so how old are you, and how many kids do you have, and what's your favorite type of music? And he's just not having it. He didn't say a word, didn't even smile. So I'm getting more nervous as I'm driving. So what do I do next? I turn on the radio, and I start bopping to the beat, and he's just like not having it. Turns off the radio. He's just stone cold. So here I am, having to take my driver's test. I get through it, subpar parallel parking job, finish the test. He signs off, gives me my driver's license. He's probably thinking, I don't want to ever see this child again. There's no way I'm not going to pass her. So I passed my driver's test, 100 hours of training. The second license was my counseling license. I had just finished up 3 years of education, and then following that, I did 2,500 hours of one-to-one client sessions. 2,500 sessions, can you imagine? Just to get a counseling license. And then I had to take this big exam, the National Counselor Exam. Do we have any counselors in here by any chance? I'm just curious. One counselor, awesome. Take this big exam. We get to the exam site. It was about 3 hours away. John and I were newlyweds at the time. So we drive to the exam center. It's the middle of the night. I'm feeling kind of nervous about this big exam I had tomorrow, because if you don't pass, you don't get your driver's license, your counseling license. And next thing you know, the entire bed starts to shake. It almost felt like the whole room was shaking. And of course, my first thought is, my husband must be like shaking his leg. He's 6'4", so I elbow him in the middle of the night. I'm like, John, stop moving. And he's like, groggy. What are you talking about? I'm sleeping. It's like 4 a.m. I'm like, well, that's weird. So I go back to bed. In the morning, we're having breakfast, and it's all over the news. There was a huge earthquake in the middle of the night. And that kind of gives you a little glimpse into my marriage. My husband slept through an earthquake. I mean, think about it. We have 4 kids. He can sleep through an earthquake. So I go in, take my counseling exam. Thankfully, I passed. But I'll never forget that day. Third license, my marriage license. I'll never forget that day either. We walked into the courthouse, and they gave us a paper to sign. We gave them a check. They gave us our license, and that was it. Pretty anticlimactic. Nothing happened. No training, no education, no prep hours, no exam, nothing. And isn't that fascinating? That the most important thing you're going to do, the most important license, the most important decision that's going to change the course of your life, you don't get any training. You're just given a piece of paper. Good luck with that. And I think that is part of the reason why so many of us end up struggling through marriage. Why do we expect to be good at it when that's the preparation that goes into it? Just because you're a Christian doesn't mean you're going to be good at marriage. In fact, most Christians aren't actually good at marriage. It's not something you're naturally born knowing how to do. Relationships are something you have to learn. And, some of you might be thinking, well, we got pre-marriage counseling. Well, that's a great start. That's a good 8 hours, right? Imagine your surgeon walked in and said, don't worry, I got 8 hours of training. You're in good hands. I'm pretty sure you would freak out, walk out of the room, find another surgeon, right? But yet with marriage, at best, we've got 8 to 10 hours of training. Maybe 20. Let's just even put it at 20. But the majority of people don't even have that. And so we go into marriage with such little preparation until one day our expectation of marriage meets the reality of marriage. And they're 2 very different things. When I wrote Choosing Marriage, I gathered data. One of my favorite things to do is gather data. And the beautiful thing about having a website that gets millions of hits, free research. You just put out some polls, some surveys, and it's people from all across the country. I surveyed over 1,000 singles, and then I surveyed over 1,000 married couples, and I asked them questions about what marriage was like. I asked singles, what do you think marriage is like in hot topic issues such as conflict, sex, communication, compatibility, intimacy, lifestyle? What do you think marriage is going to be like, singles? And then I asked married couples those same questions. What is marriage actually like in communication, conflict, compatibility, intimacy, sex, lifestyle? What is the reality? And I think one of the most fascinating things about the survey data was how different the answers were from what singles assumed marriage to be like to what marriage was actually like. The answers were so starkly different, to the point where you look at the data and you think, we really have no clue what we're doing when we're going into this relationship. We have no idea. And so then I went back to the married couples and I asked them, what percentage, give me a percentage, how many of you feel like you knew the sacrifice of marriage before going into it? How many of you feel like you were kind of prepared for it? 97% of married couples said that in hindsight, they weren't prepared at all, and they really had no clue the struggles that they were going to face and how hard it was going to be. I never expected this. This isn't what I expected. I hear that phrase a lot in counseling sessions with people. This isn't what I expected. He's not what I expected. She's not what I expected. I expected what I see on Instagram. I expected what I see in the movies. I expected from looking at other people's marriages from the outside looking in. That's what I expected. Everybody looks like they're doing all right. They're happy. That's what I expected. But that's not the reality of marriage. And I get the unfortunate behind the scenes as a counselor. One of my college roommates wrote this beautiful tribute to her husband on their anniversary. They had 4 children, and they'd been married for well over a decade at the time. And you know how people write all this amazing stuff on social media and post these beautiful pictures of their marriage and their family? And this tribute to her husband was just so beautiful. Like reading it, I almost got tears in my eyes. A couple days later, I get a message from her, a private message telling me, my marriage is in shambles. This isn't what I expected. I think he might have a drinking problem. We don't communicate well. I don't think we're going to be able to survive this. So what you see on social media isn't always what's going on behind the scenes in real life. And I think earlier today when we had the panel here, we talked about sometimes you feel like you're alone in your struggles. Even at this marriage conference, people are all cozied up, holding hands, and it looks like everyone's doing well. And when you're not at that place, you can feel alone. But I want you to know that every single couple will get to a point in their marriage where they say, this isn't what I expected. And when you get there, congratulations, you're normal. You have arrived to the reality of marriage. But it's what you do from there that makes the difference. I asked married couples in the same survey, what are the top areas in your life where you look at your relationship and you think, this is not what I expected, this is way harder than I thought it would be? Here's the top areas that they said. Number 1, financial problems, way stickier than they thought they would be. Number 2, lifestyle differences. He's an outdoorsy kind of guy. She's a homebody, for example. Lifestyle, just the way you live your life, looks different than they thought it would be. Sexual issues. Over 80% of couples reported at some point in their marriage they dealt with a sex problem in some way, shape, or form, whether it was differences in desire, whether it was an actual medical issue, whether it was an emotional struggle, whether it was pornography. Over 80% of couples said at some point we struggled with this and we didn't expect to. Dealing with extended family. We just get out of the holiday season, and there's a good chance you just went through that one in some way, shape, or form, right? A couple of you are like nudging each other. This is part of the reality of marriage. And number 5 was personality differences. You didn't expect your spouse's personality to be a certain way, to clash with yours the way that it does. My husband is super laid back. I mean, he sleeps through earthquakes. I mean, that just tells you how laid back he is. I'm a little bit more on the type A side. And when we were in pre-marriage counseling, I remember the counselor said, Debra, you are the gas and John is the brakes. And gas and brakes need each other. But sometimes in real life, they clash, right? Sometimes in real life, it's like, okay, let's move. Whereas he's thinking, let's relax, let's slow down. And we need each other. But sometimes those personality differences can really get in the way. Things that you didn't expect to happen. Things that you're not quite sure how to work through. And when we get into marriage and it's not what we expect it to be, oftentimes people panic when they get to those really hard places. And they wonder if they married the right person. Did they make a good choice? Are they even compatible? What is going on here? But your compatibility is strictly up to you. I say that compatibility is your ability to come together. So it's not about how different you are. It's not about your personalities, your lifestyle issues. Those things might cause some problems. But your compatibility is determined by your ability to come together. Do you learn from each other? Do you grow? Do you become a different person along the way of marriage? Or do you just stick to who you think you should be? Marriage requires us to grow and to change and to choose. Speaking of choosing, anyone here watch reality TV at any point? Raise your hand if you've watched some reality TV. Don't worry, I'm not going to judge you. It's okay. We already talked about Blacklist. I mean, how much worse can it get, right? Reality TV, there's a show called Married at First Sight. Anyone ever hear of it? Yeah? Married at First Sight. It's a social experiment type of show where they take a group of single people and they give them a battery of psychological tests. And from that group of singles, they choose 2 people that they think would be a good match for each other in marriage. And just as crazy as it sounds, they do match them up, but they meet for the first time on their wedding day. Married at first sight, surprise. So they get up to the altar, and there's this person that's supposedly a perfect match for them according to these psychologists. In fact, I had one of the pastors from that show, one of the chaplains, on my podcast recently, and we were just talking about kind of the craziness of this show. I mean, this is a literal marriage license. They are legally married. But what happens inevitably through this show is the first time they meet, there's all kinds of emotions. Usually it's euphoria and excitement and chemistry. And a lot of people are feeling like, oh, I finally met my match. This is so amazing. They're so excited. By week 2, things are starting to get a little bit sticky. It's like, wait, this person's a little annoying, and I don't like how they react to things. And then reality is starting to come up. And it's funny because in this show, it's a kind of a cross-section of real marriage, but it just happens so quickly because they're kind of in this pressure cooker of reality TV. By the 3rd week, there's conflict and explosions happening left and right. It's almost inevitable. Every couple kind of goes through this pattern. And one day I was watching this show, and I'll never forget one of the guys, was getting interviewed by the producers, and he said, I shouldn't be with someone if I'm not happy. I shouldn't be with her if she's not making me happy. And there is the biggest lie of our culture, that marriage is about your happiness. If you're not happy, something's wrong. My co-author and friend, Gary Thomas, says in his book, marriage is about your holiness more than it is about your happiness. Because there's going to be a day, a moment, a season in your marriage where you're struggling and you're not happy. And it doesn't mean you've married the wrong person, but it is a reflection of the fact that you're making the wrong choices. Because the choices that you make today are what pave the way for the type of marriage you have tomorrow. And that's why our choices are so important. When we talk about choosing marriage, we're talking about choices, a whole lot of choices that add up to the equation of your relationship. Little choices that you make every single day, some of them so automatic that you don't even notice you're making them. Some of them so ingrained in you from childhood that you don't even recognize them. And these are some of the things we're going to dissect today, because a good marriage isn't something that the lucky ones just stumble upon. A good marriage comes from a series of decisions over an extended period of time with the commitment of two people choosing to love each other no matter what may come their way. A series of choices. In choosing marriage, I talk through 8 really important choices that are going to affect your life. And over this weekend, we're really going to focus on 3 of the most common ones and how you can start making those choices tonight, today, this weekend. And the barriers that might be preventing you from making some of these choices, the choices that people struggle with the most. The first one is one we talked about a little bit today. It was neat to hear some of the couples on the panel talking about this choice, choosing selflessness. Choosing selflessness. It's one of the very first choices we have to make on a regular basis. When you look at the word selflessness, the word itself reveals its definition, less of self. I actually started experiencing less of self the very first weekend I met my husband. Because growing up, I went by the nickname Debbie. My name's Debra, but everybody called me Debbie. That was just my childhood nickname. My friends called me Debbie. My parents called me Debbie. My cousins. I went off to college. Everyone called me Debbie. That's just who I was. And fast forward in graduate school, I'm at a conference and I meet John. We met during the breakout times of this conference up in Boston. Really nice guy. I remember meeting him for the first time, and the first thing that crossed my mind isn't, oh my gosh, I just met the one. It was, why would anyone wear long sleeves with shorts? His sense of fashion really caught my eye. And so we got to know each other, and we're making really good conversation, and all of a sudden he starts calling me Deb. Yeah, Deb, it's so nice to meet you. And I'm thinking, I just told you my name's Debbie. It's not Deb. Debs are serious and boring, and nobody wants to be a Deb, but Debbies are fun and lighthearted. And he's sorry if there's any Debs in there. Any Debs in the room? Just curious. No, thank God. So he starts calling me Deb. But you know what? After a while, it kind of stuck, and I kind of liked it because he was the only one that called me Deb. And it's kind of funny because truly, you can tell how someone knows me today by the name they call me. If they come up to me and say, hey, Debbie, it's good to see you, you know it was the pre-John days. That's how they know me. If they call me Deb, it was the AJ days, the after John days, because now everybody in my life calls me Deb. And so I lost a little bit of myself the very first day that John and I met. But when I talk about selflessness, I'm not actually talking about that type of loss. I'm not talking about the loss of identity. I'm talking about the loss of self. letting go of the things God has called us not to be in exchange for the things that God has called us to be. Letting go of our sin, our struggles, our pride, our junk, our baggage, our childhood wounds, our pain, the hurts from our past, our trust issues, our communication deficits. Letting go of all of those things in exchange for something better. And that something better is who God has called us to be. John 3:30, he must become greater. I must become less. We're choosing less of self in exchange for more of Jesus. And this isn't an automatic process. I think one of the things that bothers me most about Christians is that they think everything's an automatic process. You know, you just come to Jesus, stand there, close your eyes, and next thing you know, you're healthy emotionally and spiritually and physically and relationally. But we don't have that same mentality with other areas of life. When you come to Jesus, did you all of a sudden get a six-pack or biceps? Or if you were taking cholesterol medicine yesterday, did you stop taking it the day after you came to Jesus? We don't have that mentality with physical things, but with emotional and relational things, we don't realize that we have to put in the work. Becoming a selfless person doesn't just happen because you come to Jesus. The Holy Spirit at work in you is ready to help you take those steps. But you're not going to take those steps until you realize you have to take them, until you come up with a plan and start putting in the work of becoming selfless. There's a lot of things that hold us back from being selfless. I think most of the time we don't even realize that we're being selfish. Like someone mentioned earlier in the panel, you spend so much time as a single person being single with only one person on the agenda, yourself. You don't realize that when you come into marriage and become one flesh, we're talking literally one flesh. One sink in the bathroom, one bed, one Netflix subscription, one remote, one bank account. I mean, every detail is all of a sudden shared with somebody else. There's a learning curve there that happens. And if you can't start that process of becoming selfless in the small stuff, you better believe when the hard stuff comes, your muscles aren't going to be working. They're going to be atrophied because you haven't practiced selflessness in the day-to-day things. And this is why it matters. Selflessness in the small things help us pave the way and develop our muscles for selflessness in the big things. Speaking of small stuff, is there anybody else in here that has some of those small marriage problems? One of the things that I always talk about in our house is called our bathroom drama. Does anybody else have bathroom drama in here? Well, let me tell you what it's all about. My side of the sink has my hair products, my makeup, straightening iron, a couple other things kind of strewn around because I need them, and I need them every day. So what's the point of putting them away when I'm going to need them again in the morning, right? Anybody else on my side of the camp? Come on, people. Don't leave me hanging here. And then who's on the other side of the camp where your side of the sink is as clean as the day you moved in? Anybody? Anybody? Few of you? So John, the clean side, is married to me, the creative side. I'm not going to say messy. You better believe I'm not owning that. The creative side of the sink. And every now and again, my side starts to kind of creep into his side. He takes his long 6'4" arms and just kind of shoves it all back to my side. It's the bathroom drama. And then look at our toilet paper roll, okay? Anybody have toilet paper issues in your marriage where some of you put the roll on the wrong way? First of all, There is a right way to put on the toilet paper roll. You just haven't learned it yet. But here's the thing. In our marriage, it's even worse than that. I don't even care what side he puts the roll on. He leaves about 1 square left. What am I supposed to do with 1 square? I mean, it's frustrating. So then what do? Well, I go get a new roll, but I'm like, you know what? I'm not changing this roll. I'm putting my foot down. And so I prop it. Did you see the prop up there? Let's see the roll prop. This is a real life picture of the roll in our home on a regular basis. I don't know which one of us is more annoying, me or John. Can you raise your hand back there? There's the guy that can sleep through an earthquake. So it's like these little things. And there's so many more that I could mention when it comes to where we throw our clothes, or how we load the dishwasher, like you said earlier, or those little details that can aggravate you, and you can think that your way is the right way. Philippians 2:4, let each of you look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. What I love about this verse, it's so balanced. The Bible is so balanced. For example, love your neighbor as you love yourself. There's a balance there. You know, when we talk about this verse in Philippians, it could have said, look only to the interests of others. But it doesn't. It says, let each of you look not only to your own interests, not just you, but also to the interests of others. There's a balance there. It's not saying don't consider yourself at all. Don't have any needs at all. It's saying, well, look at their interests as well. We're equal parties here. And I think some marriage advice drives me a little loony, because it says that selflessness means looking only to the interest of your spouse. But God never calls us to die on the altar of marriage. We're both important parties in the equation, but don't just look at your own interests. Look at the interests of your spouse. Start to focus on what they need as well. Start to shift your perspective. And that's kind of what I want to talk to you a little bit about today. The give and take of selflessness. Because most times you hear about the one side, the giving side of selflessness, but there's 2 sides to the equation of selflessness. And if we don't get both sides right, we're going to have an unbalanced, unequal, and unhealthy marriage. When we talk about giving to your spouse, I also want to talk about receiving from your spouse. Because for some of you, asking for something is even harder than giving. There's some givers in here, for sure. And there's some people in here that need to work on their giving. But there's some people who also need to work on their asking. There's a book called A Severe Mercy by Sheldon Van Auken. And in the book, he talks about how it is just as selfless and considerate and humbling to ask for a cup of water in the middle of the night as it is to go and get the cup of water for your spouse in the middle of the night. Because asking something requires a humility. I feel hurt and I need affirmation from you. That's not an easy ask, but it's an ask. I am struggling right now and I need your prayers. There's a humility and a selflessness in learning to ask and receive from your spouse. But there's also a humility in giving when they ask and acknowledging the need and meeting it. Selflessness is a 2-sided equation. Speaking of cup of water in the night, my grandma tells this story of when she was a newlywed young woman. Her husband was a really busy entrepreneur, businessman in Cairo, Egypt. That's where my grandparents are from. And yes, I speak fluent Arabic for anyone who cares to have a conversation later. And one night, my grandpa asked for a cup of water in the middle of the night. He was diabetic and he was thirsty, and he just said, would you mind grabbing me a cup of water? And she wanted to go do that for him, so she went and got him a cup of water. Well, the next day, middle of the night, same thing. Could you get me a cup of water? Third night, could you get me a cup of water? And soon there was a pattern. So she's like, you know what? I'm going to outsmart him. Why am I doing this every night? I'm just going to bring it before bed, before he asks. She brought a pitcher of water and an empty cup and put it by the nightstand. In the middle of the night, he gets a business call. He's fumbling around to find the rotary phone, you know those phones with the long wires. And he grabs the pitcher thinking it's the phone, and everybody gets soaked in the middle of the night. It's like a slapstick comedy moment, but she always talks about that act of selflessness and how it soaked them both. They both suffered in the end and had a good laugh out of it. But here's the thing about selflessness. It's always going to require some sort of sacrifice. It's always going to require some sort of sacrifice. If it's convenient, it's probably not selflessness. Remember that one. It's always going to ask something of you. And we're going to talk about what selflessness looks like, but before we do, I want to tell you what selflessness is not. Selflessness is not the same as passivity. Let me say that again. Selflessness is not the same as passivity. And many of you are fueling unhealthy marriages because you're being passive. And you think it's selflessness. You think you're doing what God wants you to do. But it's causing problems that you don't even realize, because you can only take so much passivity before something cracks and something breaks and someone explodes. Here's what selflessness is not. Number one, selflessness is not always saying yes. That's not selflessness. If you're always saying yes, then ultimately the problem is with you. Because if you're saying yes to something, you're saying no to something else. And if you're saying yes, but you really don't want to do it, and so you have a bad attitude the rest of the day, are you really being selfless? Or are you just suppressing your needs? Selflessness is not keeping hurts to yourself and staying quiet about it. You ever been in the car and you know something's wrong with your spouse? Like they're not acting normal. Hey, hun, everything okay? Yes. Fine. You sure? Yes, everything's fine. Okay. A couple minutes later, you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. And you're the ice queen the whole way there, right? Not talking, not interacting. Or you're the ice king, withdrawing, saying that everything's fine, but really it's not. That's not selflessness. Keeping those hurts to yourself, thinking, I don't want to open a can of worms. But you're not actually being honest about what you feel and what's going on inside of you. That's not selflessness. That's passivity. And it's destroying your marriage. Because all of that pent up stress and emotion, it goes somewhere. Most of the time it gets stored as bitterness and resentment. And that's a whole lot harder to get rid of later on. Selflessness is not failing to voice your needs. You can't expect someone to do something or be something for you that you never told them you need them to be. And many of you have needs, but you're not voicing them. Maybe you've never looked at your wife and said, I need affirmation. Maybe you've never looked at your husband and said, I am struggling with insecurity, and I could really use some encouragement. Saying what you need is a huge part to a healthy marriage, and some of you have silenced yourself in the name of selflessness because that's what your parents did. Your mom never complained. Your dad never complained. Heck, your parents never even fought. But tomorrow you're going to see that couples that don't fight aren't necessarily healthy couples because there's a healthy way to fight. And I think there are too many people walking around enabling toxic behaviors and unhealthy behaviors in the name of selflessness. But I want you to remember this: selflessness fuels healthy behaviors. Passivity fuels unhealthy behaviors. So that's one of the litmus tests. Am I fueling healthy behaviors by being silent right now? Or am I fueling unhealthy behaviors in me or in my spouse? What does it look like to take ownership of your needs and your feelings and to trust your spouse with those needs? There's a humility there. There's a selflessness there that many of us are missing. So then, what is selflessness? I asked a few friends to share with me what selflessness looks like in their marriage, and here's what they said. Selflessness means him waking up on a Saturday morning to watch the kids so I can sleep in. Selflessness is when she goes out of her way to make me dinner when I know she's just as tired as me. Selflessness is when he listens and values what I have to say, no matter what time of day it is. Selflessness is putting the needs of your spouse before your own. Doesn't mean you ignore your needs, but you consider their needs and you look at their needs. Let each of you not only look to your own interests, like we talked about, but the interests of others. But how do you know your spouse's needs? Well, you ask. And I think too many of us aren't actually asking, hey, how are you doing? What do you need? How can I help? How can I be here for you? What do you need from me? What would you rather do? You can't know your spouse's needs unless you ask. So half of you need to do a better job of explaining your needs, and the other half need to do a better job of asking your spouse's needs. Selflessness means stepping out of your norm. Over 50% of married couples in our surveys, 50%, reported that they're involved in completely separate activities and hobbies. I found that number interesting, correlating with the 50% divorce rate. Does it have anything to do with it? I don't know. But I would venture to say that many couples who have separate interests and hobbies as their primary way of using their free time find themselves slowly drifting a little bit faster than the rest of us, right? So what does it look like for you to step out of your norm? You know, maybe you don't like to read books, but you're going to take on that hobby because you want to do something that your spouse likes. Maybe you don't like cooking, but you're going to take on that interest to have a shared interest with your spouse. I think so many of us get comfortable just doing our separate things. You do you, you know? Just do whatever you want to do. I'll do whatever I want to do. But when you take away the time we sleep and work and take care of kids, we've got such little time to connect left over. Separate hobbies and interests on top of that take us even a little bit further from one another. So what does it look like to step out of your norm and to do things that your spouse loves, to connect with them? John started learning website design and development behind the scenes when my ministry turned into an online ministry. We started connecting and planning together, and he became a huge part of the ministry that I do, even though he's a doctor. He's in the healthcare world. He has nothing to do with online stuff. But he's like, you know what? If this is something she's going to be involved in, I'm going to learn about it. I have picked up playing chess because John loves chess, and he grew up playing it with his dad, and he wants to pass it on to our kids. It's not my thing, but I am learning to love it because he loves it and I love him. What does it look like to step out of your norm and do something that your spouse loves? Selflessness is learning to compromise. Compromise easily defined as taking a step towards your spouse and them taking a step towards you. It's not about my way or the highway decisions. It's about finding our way. And I think in Christian culture, that's another thing we get wrong in the name of Christian leadership. We make it about my way or the highway instead of what Jesus calls us to, sacrificial leadership, our way. How can we figure this out together? What does this look like for our family? How can we move forward together? Simply put, it's about each person giving up a little of me in order to choose we. I'm not choosing John over me. I'm choosing we over me. I'm choosing our marriage over myself. When you put it that way, it's a shift in perspective. God's not calling you to make your spouse greater than yourself because you're both equal in the kingdom of God. You both matter. Your needs matter. Your emotions matter. He's asking you to put your marriage before self. We before me. What does it look like for both of us to step up, to own our needs, to own our mistakes, to own our struggles, to communicate what we want and need from each other, to make both of us just as important in the equation because we're choosing we over me. And some of you are sitting in this room saying, yeah, Debra, that's easier said than done. It's easier said than done when you're in a marriage where your spouse is choosing you. But what about those of us who are in a marriage where that's not happening? Where my spouse isn't making good choices? I counseled a couple who was in that same boat. And when they came into marriage counseling, one of the first things I'll usually have you do after our first session together as a married couple is I'll separate you and we'll have individual sessions. And so I met with him by himself, I met with her by herself, and as we're kind of processing, they're both in a very similar place, feeling exhausted, empty, and depleted. I have nothing left. I feel empty. And when you have two empty people who are trying to get something to fill them up out of the marriage, it's going to fail. Marriage can't fill you up. And tomorrow we're going to talk a little bit about choosing fullness. But I want you tonight to realize that the enemy wants you empty and tired and drained and feeling unfulfilled, because when you're in that weak place, he can take you down. He can make you look at your spouse like the enemy. They are the problem. They are not changing. They are not doing anything. But in every marriage where there's two people who are responsible for making the relationship better. And if it's 100% your spouse, then you're in a pickle because you can't change your spouse. But when you can identify your role, I need to be filled. I need to change. I need to start saying what I need. I need to start setting boundaries. I need to learn how to say no. I need to start expressing myself. I need to start having limits. When you begin to change, the marriage begins to change. You can't change your spouse, but when you change, you can influence your marriage. Things begin to shift when you begin to do things differently. And if you're feeling stuck right now, I want you to know that you still have power. Because when you begin to do things the right way, the Lord has something to work with. He can begin to heal. He can begin to influence. He can begin to move what feels impossible to move, as long as you're looking at yourself and your growth and your healing. And that's where I want you to begin today, focusing less on the emptiness in your marriage, the brokenness in your marriage, and focusing more on the emptiness in your own life, the brokenness in your own life, the people-pleasing mentality in your own life, the fear of sharing your emotions in your own life. and begin working on that and see what God can do with the little change that starts to happen. As we close tonight, I want to leave you with 2 questions on the ride home. I want to leave you with this. What's one area in your marriage where you need to practice selflessness and giving more to your spouse? And what's one area in your marriage where you need to ask to receive more and do a better job asking what you need and opening up your heart to what's going on inside of you? Have you been living selflessly and fueling healthy behaviors? Or have you been living passively and fueling unhealthy behaviors? And that's what I want you to think about today as you drive home, as you talk at the end of the night. And tomorrow we're going to cover 2 more really important choices that will change your marriage when you start practicing them. Let me pray over you tonight. Jesus, I just thank you for each person in this room. I thank you, God, that so many of us right now might be feeling empty and drained, depleted and exhausted. But God, we know that you are living waters and you can fill us up to overflowing. And I just pray, God, tonight that you would convict us of our need to give more, or maybe our lack of ability to receive. And I just pray, God, that you would shine a light on the places in our marriage that need to be healed. And I pray that over this weekend that we would open our hearts and our lives to you to begin your healing work in our lives as individuals and in our lives as a couple. In Jesus' name, amen.